Population decline creates a paranoia in conservatives that manifests in many different ways. For some, it's about the labor shortage a country might face and the hegemonic decline associated with that. For others, it might be a warning sign that values like marriage only being between men and women is going away in favor of a more secular ideology. Or maybe it's the fear that a country's white population will be replaced by a population of immigrants. But for someone like Lyman Stone, it's all of these beliefs and more. My name is June Sternbach.
My name is Josh Borman.
This is Ill-Conceived, a podcast about natalism. So Josh, last week we did your favorite topic, your favorite thing to talk about of all time.
Yeah, my favorite guy in the world, James Dobson.
Yeah, how do you feel about getting all of that off your chest?
Finally, I've had the chance to talk about James Dobson on a podcast. It feels really, really good.
It's the first time you're liberated. And there was a lot of really good feedback from that episode. A lot of people that experienced growing up with maybe some of his writing or his media, which was really interesting to see. I, until recently, didn't realize I knew he was influential, but I didn't quite realize the extent of his influence, especially in people around our age.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I was happy to hear from people
Definitely not
who,
happy.
Experience his child-rearing techniques firsthand, but I guess there is something healing, maybe, hopefully, about being able to identify the thing for what it is. And so I hope that we can just keep talking about these things that maybe seemed or felt weird a little bit at the time, but, you never quite had the framework to point to it and be like, oh, this specific thing is fucked for this specific reason,
Yeah, there was a lot of camaraderie in a lot of our replies and people reaching out to talk about this one.
Yeah, we got some emails.
Oh, do you want to address any of them? I haven't checked the emails from last week.
Yeah, you know what? We're still sort of figuring out how to start the podcast. So one of the things that we could definitely do as part of it is our mailbag. Why don't we we'll have a mailbag. We'll have a listener mailbag.
Why not? I love that we're getting emails. Thank you for reaching out. You can email us at illconceivedpod@gmail.com if you have any suggestions, feedback, or suggestions for future episodes. We will absolutely be checking these.
So one person sent an email and said, what I learned is the subject head, and then the body of the email is, I learned that James Dobson is a little bitch. Speak on it, brother.
Clocked him. Absolutely clocked his ass, yeah. I hope he knows that. Maybe when he dies, he'll be like, God damn, I was a fucking bitch.
I hope that's the last thing that he sees before he dies, or the last thing he hears before he dies, rather than walking into the light is just a voice being like, you're a bitch. Jim, you're a bitch.
It's the least you deserve.
We also got an interesting email, and this is not specifically about Dobson, but it said, and I quote here, hey, was just listening to the podcast, and y'all said that it was something that Trump just made up, talking about the free IVF thing.
Right.
But it was pretty specifically inspired by Viktor Orban's policies, which is a whole other pro-natalist rabbit hole that I'm well read on. Just thought I would let y'all know. This is a great point, and I think that it would behoove us to talk about natalism not just here in the United States, but abroad, because Viktor Orban's whole deal is really, really interesting.
Yeah, I think Hungary is a topic that I am tentatively going to be working on in episode 4, because I think it is sort of the testing grounds for a lot of right-wing pro-natalist policies. And just for a little teaser, not all of them are really working very well there, but it's absolutely going to be a topic we probably talk about very soon.
And the last one that I wanted to read from this week is as follows. Hi, Josh and June. I just want to let you know that I'm really looking forward to more episodes of Ill-Conceived. You two make some of my favorite podcasts, and I'm excited to hear the rest of your coverage. I also wanted to write to you about my experience with Promise Keepers, which my dad attended every single year.
No way.
In 2010-ish, they let wives and daughters, like me, attend the conference as an anniversary celebration or something.
They were so kind. Wow, it's so kind to let the women in. Yeah.
So magnanimous. After listening to the Promise Keepers episode, I think it's more likely that it was to prop up declining ticket sales, because that was also the year that they shared the conference with Jews for Jesus.
Oh my God. Is this like a sister organization? Is this random?
No.
Okay.
No, that's the Jews for Jesus, like the sort of Messianic Jews. That's a whole other thing. These are Jewish people who have decided to convert to Christianity because they believe that Jesus is, in fact, the Messiah promised, in the Torah.
Okay.
Towards the end of the conference, there was a big moment where they really leaned into how Christians have to make sure the Holocaust never happens again. And then actually stationed rabbis throughout the crowd who were supposed to put yellow Star of David stickers on everyone so we could promise them never again in response. Thinking about it now, I really don't understand how seemingly no one from either organization said, this is completely inappropriate. I was 16 at the time and wouldn't learn about philo-Semitism until much later. My dad has passed since then, and ultimately the memory of that weekend is one of sharing in something personal and important with him, despite my ultimately leaving the faith. Keep up the great work on the podcast, and thank you guys.
Learning how widespread the Promise Keepers is, because this isn't the only person that has reached out to talk about their experience with the Promise Keepers.
Yeah.
It's stunning to me that so many people's like fathers, and I think someone else that reached out to us before said they were a son of someone who at least went to one or two of these events. These are fucking crazy. I wish this person, not because it's a good organization, but I wish she would have gotten to hear more about from her father what these were like beyond just that single day, because it sounds like a fever dream. Every single piece we learn about it.
Sure, other than the ones that she went to, like the ones in previous years. Yeah, who knows?
It sounds like her father was at many of these.
Well, thank you, listeners, for those emails. That wraps up our upcoming weekly segments, or maybe bi-weekly, because we do tend to record these in pairs. Send an email to illconceivedpod@gmail.com. And if you want us also to read your name, we can. You didn't explicitly say in these emails, hey, you can use my name, so I'm not including it. Nor am I. There was another really good one, but it had some personally identifiable information, so I didn't want to include that one in the mailbag either.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you so much. So I think before we kick off this episode, this one we're going to be doing just a little profile about a pro-natalist writer and head of some organizations named Lyman Stone. This was a brand new guy for me, Josh, a couple of months ago at this point, when we first started talking about doing the show. You sent me this guy, and you were just like, he seems interesting. We should look into him a little bit more. What was your intro to him?
I was talking to somebody at a bar about the podcast, and he was like, oh, so you're going to do Lyman Stone, right? And I was like, I don't know. Let me find out who he is. And then I went on his Twitter account and I started reading his posts, and I was like, oh, I've seen this guy's shit before. I just didn't know him by name, because he is one of the people who is, I don't know if you want to call him a intellectual type. He certainly positions himself as one,
Definitely
right?
Put some air quotes around that, yeah.
Yeah. He's one of the guys who is sort of attempting to establish an ideological scaffolding for the modern natalist movement, I think. And it's also interesting because, although I haven't cracked it yet, there was that biography about William Buckley just came out. And this is another guy who I think is sort of in that mold, right? He wants to be somebody who takes this ideology and makes it something that people don't just associate with a bunch of freaks. He wants to make it something that is palatable to a broader group of people by providing sort of language for it. And as somebody who's very interested in the way that ideology is developed and codified, I'm definitely interested to see what you discovered about him this week, June.
From that, I would say, I don't know how widespread this guy is, Lyman. I don't know how well known he is, but I think he kind of has achieved that status. I would say he's colleagues with people in the liberal sphere. He has some bylines at The Atlantic. He has written directly, addressing Derek Thompson and other just middle of the road liberal writers. And he's written at Vox. He's very well accepted in the ideological sphere, if you will. Yeah.
Well, and we haven't really talked about pundits yet, right? This is going to be our first time talking about that world, because most of what I've been interested in is the true believers from a religious perspective And I do think that Lyman Stone, obviously he himself is a religious guy, and we're going to be talking about this, but there's also something to be said for laundering these ideas and making them palatable to a liberal public. And you mentioned The Atlantic. I mean, that's a publication that pretty much exists for exactly that purpose, at least at this point in time.
So just a little bit about Lyman Stone. As I've said, he is primarily a writer, mostly about natalism, but of course different topics like religion, all sort of pertaining to the world of the declining birth rate. He is also the head director of the pro-natalism initiative at an organization called Institute for Family Studies. And he also runs a different organization called the Demographic Intelligence.
Okay, see, I had thought that Institute for Family Studies was his org, but that's not true.
He is just very high up in the organization.
Got it.
From what I could find, which there isn't a lot of public-facing information about specifically the demographic intelligence, that seems to be more his own little baby.
Got it.
That's more of, from what I could understand, it's more of a consulting agency. They partner with businesses to lay out birth rates around the world and just like changing demographics for businesses looking to expand in different areas. So there's not a lot about it.
And I'm seeing these are specifically their client list, at least what they show on their website. These are generally companies that focus on children. Their client base, or their customer base, I should say, is going to be like parents. I'm seeing like Gerber, Abbott, which of course makes a bunch of baby food, Pfizer, Nestle. These are the kinds of companies where it makes sense that they would really want to have a trusted source in, okay, in 20 years, how many babies are we potentially going to be able to sell products for?
Because that will affect the bottom line of a lot of these companies.
Right.
If there's not as many babies, of course, Gerber will not sell as much baby food. So it's I would say at the end of the day, it's just mostly a consulting firm ran by Lyman Stone. But the Institute for Family Studies, which she is the head director of the Pronatalism Initiative, is an organization about strengthening marriages and encouraging having more children to benefit the economy, society overall. And of course, the most important aspect of this organization is to discourage and do what they can having divorces. That is a through line you'll see with a lot of Lyman's beliefs is he thinks divorces and marriages are some of the most important factors of declining birth rate.
So I'm just going to say right now, this already sounds a lot like Focus on the Family.
Yeah, so that's the interesting thing is this guy is a religious conservative. He has very clearly stated that himself. But as you stated before, he kind of buries the lead a lot. He doesn't explicitly come out as a radical religious person. He hedges a lot of his language in, I would say, very like shiny liberal terms to not make it sound reactionary. So it's just got that broader appeal. But you're right. I do think he overall is a little bit of a reactionary dude. He has the same overall concerns, just in a different way as people like James Dobson. I did a lot of reading of Lyman Stone's, sadly. I read a lot of his different articles he put out, publications, just many different places. I sadly did buy a Vox subscription to see some of these.
Oh, no.
I know, I feel just awful about that. But I really dug into a lot of this guy's writing. One of the more interesting aspects of him is sort of how he, as I mentioned before, hedges his religious beliefs. He is, interestingly, we haven't really touched a lot on this religion sect in particular, but he's a Lutheran.
Yeah. And I guess it's time for Josh's denominational explainer.
Go for it.
The Lutherans are a denomination of Protestant Christianity that actually span a pretty broad range, but they're called Lutherans because they are sort of the OG Protestants, right? They're continuing the legacy of Martin Luther, the original Protestant reformer. But Lutheranism has actually had a number of splits within the denomination itself. So Lyman Stone is actually a member of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. And if you know, the LCMS, they're the really conservative ones. They're very evangelical, which is to say they believe in the value of the experience of being converted, born again, which, by the way, Lyman Stone apparently converted to Lutheranism from just normal non-denominational Christianity, which is crazy.
It's always these conversions, these people that convert at a later age that are just the weirdest ones.
Yes. They also then want to spread the good word to others, and generally speaking, they believe that public society should be ordered along religious lines. And all of these definitely apply to Lyman Stone.
Absolutely. And that's just like another piece of, how he doesn't really address that he is of this religious Lutheran sect.
Except for when he's writing to a Christian audience, which I also think is interesting.
He's written in a lot of different places.
I mean, I'm seeing an article here called Love One Another, the Best Evangelism Strategy from something called The Lutheran Witness.
Yes, yeah. So it's stuff like that. He writes in a lot of different places. His wife in particular does a lot of religious work. She works in, and has for a long time, different Lutheran churches. And before that, she used to teach a lot of refugee children and actually spent some time in Malaysia teaching English. So she has done like a lot of outreach work, some religious, some as a teacher. But they just have a very weird relationship with religion that they don't put to the forefront, specifically Lyman Stone, of a lot of his bigger published works, which I do think is intentional.
Although it's interesting because he does have some bylines in The Federalist, which is, of course, a very, very conservative publication. And I do see that his bio on here does call out the fact that he and his wife serve as missionaries in the Lutheran Church Hong Kong Synod. And apparently it says here he also writes about migration issues on his blog, In a State of Migration.
Yeah.
Did you read anything from In a State of Migration?
So I actually did not. I totally missed his Federalist papers. I mostly read...
Not those Federalist papers. Not the ones that Alexander Hamilton wrote. Lyman Stone wrote the other 51. That's a reference to the Hamilton the musical.
But no, this guy, he's a little bit of a slippery fella. He writes on a lot of different places, has a lot of different bios at every different website. A fun game, listeners, if you want to partake, is you can just try to find everywhere he writes and just see the little differences on every single website he's written on and just the different bios he has, because they're all different, I swear.
That is really slippery.
It is. It absolutely is. In regards to some of his religious beliefs, in some of the writing I found, he has given credence to the idea that the more religious and socially conservative a society is, the higher likelihood that the birth rate will be higher. And to prove this, he often compares religious and non-religious household birth rates, which I think there is a difference. There is a small difference. It's not like a huge difference, but there is some validity to that.
Well, it stands to reason that those things are correlative, but there's also a number of other things that are potentially conflating variables there.
Yeah.
I would be curious to read this stuff because I that sounds like something that would be, I guess, plausible, but I do have big time questions about like the methodology.
I do have a source about that, not necessarily one that he used. It is a case of he seems to find the evidence he likes and goes from that. I found different evidence that it's not significant, like in the scientific sense. It's not significantly different. But I think it does reason there is the possibility that we've talked about on the show before, that religious people believe that having more children is like honoring God. It is like bringing more Christians into the world is, of course, their duty. So there is probably more families that are religious that have larger families. So that is at least true in a sense.
There are certainly some religions that are strongly correlative with larger families. Like, for instance, like Haredi Judaism or Mormonism. There are some religions that are that way. And also, I think then when you follow the logic that he's laying out, it does end up becoming essentially evangelical, that he wants more people to become religious so that they will have more families to stave off demographic decline.
Yes, and it's not even just that. It is that, but it goes even deeper with his religious beliefs with natalism. He has diagnosed properly that millennials and Zoomers are a lot less religious than previous generations. That is just sort of the way that the world is currently going. But he does believe that there might be an inciting incident at some point. He doesn't, from what I read, he doesn't necessarily state what that could be, but he has done some writing about how he believes the increased religiosity of society is cyclical.
Well, and this definitely aligns with the evangelical thing, LCMS. This idea that like there's going to be another great awakening is something that all of these people are just obsessed with.
Yeah. A lot of conservatives will be like, oh, Gen Z, they're going to be the most conservative generation in a long time. And that just like never really manifests. A lot of it is just wish casting for the future. Yeah.
And in the case of Gen Z specifically, a lot of it was that like there was a skew toward Trump because Trump was the only candidate who promised Gen Z anything. Yeah. And now that he's breaking all those promises, I think that he's even less popular with Zoomers than millennials now. So
absolutely. A poll just came out, I think, today, which I'll include in the sources since we're talking about it. But I believe he has like 70% disapproval with Gen Z now, which is incredible. Yeah. So it's really just not true. I think Gen Z is just politically one of the strangest generations yet because of like the internet, probably. But that's a whole different discussion. But all of this to say is the reason he's really concerned about the decrease of religion is because he believes that secularization of societies leads to a lower marriage rate. And he believes that the marriage rate is inherently intertwined with the birth rate. So he states that if less people are getting married, the less likely that people are to have children. That's why a lot of his work at the Institute for Family Studies goes to ensure that people are having less divorces and that more people will hopefully get married.
It's not like we don't know why this is happening. Like, it's very obviously that people are like failing to get married. Like, this is very obviously what's happening. Like, it's transparently clear in the math anywhere you look. And it's not like it's some massive mystery why that's happening. There's stuff we can do, but it requires policymakers to do some things that are not entirely natural for them. First, getting married, having kids is a long-term project. Okay? You're on the hook for that marriage or that kid for a long time. Okay? So people don't do it if a policy is only going to be around for 2 years. Okay? Like temporary policies don't matter. Okay? They just wash out. So families want to know that policies are going to last. And that means the policy has to be something that in the public mind is associated with permanence.
I have two thoughts about this. Thought number one, this is just playing back in my mind everything from last week's episode. Like everything Dobson laid down, this is the exact same script. You'll remember there was even that clip of Dobson being a little older and being like, there are fewer people getting married, and gay marriage is going to lead to people marrying their donkeys, and the inevitable outcome of all of that is fewer children, right?
Yes.
But then this leads me to my second point. It is true that secularization leads to a decrease in the marriage rate. That's just true. But what are you going to do about it?
Right.
What are you going to do about it that isn't just rolling us back to a way that our society used to be? And the answer is he wants to roll back the society to the way that it used to be. But people like this won't take that last step. They won't explicitly draw that connection, at least not when they are trying to launder their ideals to sort of a more liberal-minded audience.
Right. It's all implicit. He is implying things like this, which you can substantiate him believing with his super religious background and his conservative beliefs. You can sort of understand that that is what he believes, but you're right, he won't say it. But from here, I think one of the more interesting aspects of when he starts to talk more about marriage is he talks a lot about marriage choice and how the increase of marriage choice has actually led to less people having children. With the increase of women having a lot more rights across the world, specifically in America, women have had a lot more individual choice on who to marry. Back in the day, back hundreds of years ago, women, of course, you could not have bank accounts. They couldn't work. They didn't.
I mean, that wasn't hundreds of years ago.
That was very recent. That was like 80.
Quite fucking recent.
Very recent. But a lot of these rights are brand new for women. There's people alive today. My grandma did not have these rights when she was a kid. She would not have unless this changed. It's very recent. But a lot of these increased rights for women allowed for women to have a lot more choice on who they marry. Back in the day, women would maybe just someone in the neighborhood, a guy that their families both knew each other. Maybe they were both farmer families. She would marry the son of the farmer family, and that's just like kind of how it was. Now that women can have jobs and have their own bank accounts and all these different things, there's a lot more individual choice that goes into marriage. And Lyman Stone has a lot of thoughts on that change, which is, at the end of the day, a more feminist, secular society.
Right. And these people hate feminism. Like, deep down in their bones, they don't like the idea of women having full control over their bodies and over their agency in terms of what they do with their lives.
Yes. When a lot of these conservatives, like Charlie Kirk, when Ben Shapiro, all of these people that are anti-feminists, and that's like how they dunk on the libs with they're like the blue hair anti-feminists, is to attempt to create a counter to these rights that were gained, because they genuinely do believe this isn't just like a dunk that they are doing. They do want women to have less rights. And that's why a lot of people, even Lyman Stone, even though he doesn't say these things explicitly, is very dangerous. So Lyman Stone, marriage choice, he believes that women having more choices is implicitly, his belief is that that's worse for the future of the birth rate.
The single thing you really have to do if you want people to get married is like make 25-year-old men rich. And I know that like that sounds like oh, that's so like regressive, but like I'm not like 25-year-old women didn't like become less hot. Okay. Like there's no social problem there. And again, I'm not trying to do like some like gross, like incel thing here. Okay. I'm not saying like, oh, women just like owe it to men. No, like the men are bad marriage candidates. Like they are. I understand why women are like, I don't want to marry that guy. He's like, I don't know if there's no credible signal of where he's going with life.
Which is, I think, a very interesting like framing for him, because he understands. Goes back to what you were saying before. He understands the very bad look that a lot of these more radical right-wingers have when they talk about these issues. He's trying to sell it to this Vox audience. He knows that someone might hear this and be like, oh, this dude's an incel. Yeah.
Kind of like last week, that interview with Jim Daly, where he was talking on All Things Considered, and he was like, well, I just disagree.
Yeah.
and the rhetoric, it's gotten a bit hot, but can't we all just, learn to disagree with each other? It's like, that's not what you're saying, motherfucker. These people, they hide the ball so expertly.
Yeah. And when you start to dissect these implicit beliefs from what they're saying, they always get very upset. It's like, well, that's not what I said. And it's like, well, that's not what you said. But what do you mean by that?
But that's what you meant. And if that's not what you meant, what did you mean, motherfucker? And they will never allow themselves to get pinned down, because they want to engineer a rhetorical environment where it becomes okay to say those things, but we're not there yet. And so instead they have to rely on euphemism and innuendo.
Absolutely. And to me, a lot of these beliefs sort of, he probably won't say this, but I do think that if you want maybe there to be less marriage choice in society, he probably doesn't necessarily see, he might properly diagnose that this is not great for women. But to me, this implicitly endorses the idea of arranged marriages, which I did some digging, and a lot of studies have shown that arranged marriages don't even necessarily increase the amount of children that these couples will have. And of course, in these different societies, they tend to have a higher divorce rate too. So it is not necessarily like marriage choice might give women a lot more rights. They can work in the workplace. They can have all of these individual freedoms. They can rely on themselves a lot more. But there's not, as far as I could find, there is not any specific consensus among demographers that this has actually led to a direct decline of the birth rate and marriage rate.
Yeah, I'm seeing this abstract, actually, that you found in Nepal. Somebody took a look at arranged versus non-arranged marriages in like a rural community and found that it really didn't matter, like one way or the other.
There was not a significant change, yeah. People like Lyman Stone talk very broadly about these topics, but as far as I could find, there was not a consensus, there was not a significant increase or decrease among any of these specific in terms of marriage choice or religiousness of society. But I do think there is that widespread belief, especially among conservatives, that the less religious a society is, the less likely people will get married or have kids. Lyman has stated that he thinks men's most meritable trait, the thing that would get a potential woman to marry a man, is a high income.
Absolutely.
Yes. So as we know, that is absolutely what it is. So he thinks because women have entered the workforce. Men and women, of course, not perfect, but have a likely chance to have equal incomes. Maybe a woman has a higher income than a man. And he does view that as a problem because he doesn't think men are as meritable or likely to get married because of this change in dynamic. So ultimately, I think what he means by marriage choice is he wishes for an earlier time in American history where women had a lot less rights, where they had to rely on men to become more upwardly mobile or leave their family home to just rely on men a lot more. Because back in these days, men created single income households, which a lot of, and we'll probably see this a lot when we explore, especially more liberal writers, a lot of people do think a single income household will lead to an increase in birth rate, which may be. But since a lot more people are working these days, especially women, I do think especially for a lot of these men, do, of course, think that the way to go back to this time is to get women out of the workplace and less rights.
But that's also interesting too, right? Because the moment that you start removing women from the workplace, then your gross domestic product goes down.
Right.
People aren't making as much money anymore. So you might end up having a lot more kids, but you'll also have a lot less economic prosperity.
Right.
That's sort of the deal that you make is, if women are going to simply be the ones who stay at home and have a bunch of kids and raise them, you don't also get to have this incredible economic productivity. You really can't do both.
Yeah, I mean, with the introduction of women into the workplace, that has essentially doubled the productivity of these nations. Maybe not directly, maybe not one-to-one, doubled, but it did completely change the way that capitalistic societies function. And as we're sort of talking a little bit about the politics of this side of natalism, I think it makes sense to dig a little deeper into some of Lyman Stone's thoughts on the current political state of this country, because of course he is somehow able to tie even that to the fall in birth rates.
Of course.
It's interesting when all of your prior beliefs seem to confirm what you want to believe.
I love it when that happens.
Yeah, especially when it happens for me. I love when I find exactly everything I want to believe.
Hell
it's
yeah.
Great. But one of his primary concerns about just the state of politics today is polarization of politics and the creation of what he describes as echo chambers.
No, not echo chambers.
We hate echo chambers. They're so
I hate
bad.
them.
And he, of course, a lot of people, maybe a lot of centrists, a lot of conservatives have a lot of issues with echo chambers. Do you want to define, just maybe for those uninitiated? I don't know how well versed in this specific topic maybe all of our listeners are, but do you want to maybe
construct a working definition?
Yeah.
I guess the best way that I could describe an echo chamber, at least in this rhetorical framing, right, is there is a tendency among similar-minded people to congregate in places and say things to each other that are very similar-minded while excluding people who disagree with them. And the net result of this is that you get less discourse that sort of spans the ideological divide, and people end up just growing more and more segregated from each other ideologically as the result of these communications.
Yeah, and I think we see this manifest a lot, especially in more online spaces. You see it a lot on Twitter, where there's conservatives lamenting the fact that they can't go on dating apps without being roasted or denied a date because they have a different political belief from romantic interest. I think we all maybe have an example of maybe even knowing someone like that, where you maybe lost a friendship because of political beliefs. So, he is right. There is an increase in political polarization. I think that just comes with the fact that we are all consuming a lot more political content due to the internet, of course. And I just think people these days, politics itself has just become a lot more polarized.
I think that at bottom, when it comes down to it, when guys like Lyman Stone talk about the need for decreased political polarization, What they actually mean is stop being mad at me
Yes.
and stop being mean to me.
Yeah, maybe stop criticizing the fact that I don't really like gay marriage all too much.
Right.
Yeah, it's always stuff like that. It's always like a sort of a fascistic. It's like whenever someone has a problem with these beliefs, it's like, I don't really like that you're transphobic. And it's like, oh, so you want to kill me?
No, I don't want to kill you. I just want you to shut the fuck up, right? Yeah. But you do apparently want to kill me.
Yeah.
And that I think is a really important fucking distinction.
Absolutely. And he hasn't really specified too many solutions for this, other than the fact that he thinks what should be done is politicians should be the ones to try to depolarize politics. So I don't even know how this is possible in an age of Trump.
Yeah, I was going to say, he's definitely, every article he's writing is talking about how bad Trump is, right?
I don't think I saw him mention Trump a single time, interestingly.
Color me shocked.
Yeah. But implicitly, I do think he probably does have concerns with how Donald Trump. I'm just going to hand him that at the very least. I do think he probably doesn't like the polarization that has come in the age of Trump, and I do think we can probably attribute a lot of political polarization to Donald Trump and a lot of the downstream effects that the anti-wokeness movement have created.
Both Trump and the people like him, Bolsonaro, Orban. Yeah. Guys like that.
But he does believe that if we could depolarize society, we'll have an increase of marriage rates. And I think that's just because because I think he just genuinely thinks that if you go on Tinder and you don't have that moment of I don't want to match with you because you're a conservative. If there's not that moment, people will be a lot less picky, that is, it seems goofy, but I do think
that's a bizarre opinion. But
that is genuinely his opinion.
But again, I gotta poke at what's really going on here, right?
Yeah.
When you say that, what you're really saying is women shouldn't be able to discriminate in their choice of partner based on political preference.
Absolutely.
That's the actual message there.
100%. That is the message.
And he would dispute that. He would absolutely dispute that. If I were to say that to him right now, he'd be like, what are you talking about? I just want people to be less polarized. But at bottom, if your proposed solution is that if we just became less political, then blah, 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 all you're doing is hearkening back to an earlier time when women weren't even fucking allowed to vote.
Right. No, that's the thing, is a lot of, when it comes to the politics and religion side of Lyman's beliefs, and a lot of people in his orbit, it really is just, they believe that women have just gotten a little too free. They've gotten just a little too much, and that freedom has ripped the fabric of society apart. And I did some digging, and I was like, I do think politics and society definitely is more polarized, but I decided to look into just how that's changed over the years. So back in the 1960s, I found a really interesting study, which you can find in the show notes. From 1960, there was only 5%, roughly, it wasn't a complete exact estimate, but roughly 5% of people found it important to have very similar political beliefs in their partner and the person they married. Very low. So that does show that there was, people were a lot less picky. And of course, the 1960s was a very different political era. There was a lot of gains of different rights at this time.
Right.
So I compared to that, where it was roughly 5%, I decided to see where it was today in a recent Marist study. The study was mostly about Donald Trump's first 100 days in office.
But Marist and pollsters like that will also often ask other questions just to kind of get a sense of demographic benchmarks and stuff like that.
Yeah. So in this one, they did specifically ask whether or not it's important to date someone with a similar political view. 48% of Americans do think it's very important to date and marry someone with similar political beliefs. So in about 60 years, that is a massive increase. That does indicate there is polarization. Does that necessarily mean that has led to less people getting married, which of course he believes is one of the most important things that will lead to an increased birth rate? Maybe, but I also don't think it's maybe not, and I also don't care specifically.
Right.
I think it's a goofy. It feels very above it all to be like, oh no, just don't care about your partner's political beliefs, because there's
exactly
people like me who I am a trans woman. I can't just be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna date this really conservative transphobic person.
Right.
That's just not going to work. You do have to be picky. And a lot of people, especially in this political climate, do have to be picky because a lot of conservative ideology these days is trying to roll back the rights of trans people, of women, of Black Americans, of every different group. So they're putting the blame on these groups like, oh, just be less picky.
And it also makes me wonder about who they were polling in that study from like that whatever it was back in the 1960s, right? Like, what were the demographics there? Yeah, it turns out that the business of politics actually becomes really, really messy when it comes to preserving everybody's rights in a pluralist society. And the United States was simply not a pluralist society in the 50s and 60s in the way that it is now.
And more broadly, just beyond individual politics, people like Lyman Stone have a lot of different thoughts about governments across the world, how they're trying to handle the birth rates. One that you mentioned earlier, Hungary. It's one of the more interesting leading examples of a country trying to, especially in a very conservative way.
Well, and in Hungary, they actually have like a per-child tax credit. And the way that it works is it goes up the more kids you have, like on a per child basis. Like if you have 4 kids, you're not just getting 4 times the tax credit, you're getting like 4 times 4 the tax credit because the amount you get per child also increases.
Yeah, and as far as I'm aware, I've been keeping track because I do think Hungary is a very interesting case of a country being pretty aggressive with their policies. And from what I've seen, I'll link the information that talks about this because I saw one just earlier today, actually. But the birth rate in Hungary has not increased even when these policies started. So I think they are trying to get a little bit more aggressive in Hungary with this.
Even though they're giving them like hundreds of free dollars per month per child.
Yeah, and I think the belief of Hungary and a lot of these different countries attempting these is if you just throw money at people, they will have children, and it just has not manifested. So people like Lyman and even liberal writers like Matty Iglesias, like I've mentioned before, the way they talk about government policy with this is they kind of all accept that there has just been no good solution from the government at all in any capacity in any country that's tried it, like Hungary, Japan, any of the Scandinavian countries. No government has really cracked the code.
Does Lyman Stone say this? Is he like, oh, we haven't figured it out? Or does he think that throwing money at it is a good solution?
So he does admit there's not many clear solutions as of yet. But
okay.
He did in one of his pieces talk about France. So he noticed that the birth rate in France has been very, very, very slowly declining, but it's been relatively more stable than a lot of neighboring European countries. And he dug into what France did after the baby boom era. And he did see that there was a lot of natalist policies that they kept adding and adding and adding that eventually created a very long-term, stable pro-natalist agenda. And he does say that a lot of countries will try policies and immediately take them away, and he doesn't think that's helpful. So he does point to France as maybe the solution of you need like 80 years of these policies to really make a difference. And I wanted to dig a little deeper on this topic because I thought that was very interesting. And this has been the aspect of the birth rate question, I guess you could say, that I have thought about ever since studying natalism a little bit more, is just that some of these countries, nothing has worked.
Because you can also look at countries like, say, Finland, which have unbelievably generous government policies around things like childcare and family leave and stuff like that. It's not helping them either.
No, and those are the more like liberal solutions, and
right.
Those aren't working. None of these have worked. And I found an interesting piece that you can again find in the show notes of some people that were interviewed in some of these different countries, and just even I think one was in America, of people and their thoughts about government programs that are designed to incentivize people to have more children. And a common consensus I found among a lot of these people is that they just didn't really like when it felt like the government was telling them to have more children. And
I mean, yeah, that makes sense.
It does. And I think the most blatant case of this is Japan. I don't know the current state of it, but I know back in 2023, there was advertisements placed just on billboards of have more kids. You know, Shinzo Abe, before he was assassinated, that was a big plank of his political agenda. There were signs in Japan that were just basically like, have sex, have children, please, we're begging you. And that just didn't
Stop
work.
Gooning.
Yeah.
Come out of the goon cave.
And just, it doesn't work.
Well, and I don't know, just speaking for myself, a big piece of it for me is like, there are a lot of things about having a kid that I think would be wonderful, but I don't know. I look out the window and I see what the world is like, in the idea of growing up in this world, the world that our children are going to be inheriting, is fucking scary, dude.
Yeah, it is. I that is the common consensus among everyone my age that I've ever talked to. You know, people do have kids, but people just don't feel like there's a lot of hope to bring children into this world. And again, going back to that interview piece, that is a very common consensus among a lot of these people too. Not even just that the world feels bleak, but that they just weren't economically stable enough to, even despite some of these policies being in place in different countries, even that's not enough for people to feel like they're economically stable enough to have children. And I think that just goes to show it's not necessarily about marriage. It's not about, you know, having women in the workplace. I do think it's more about just political doomerism, just feeling like the politics of the world and the country are just not going the way you think they should. I mean, of course, millennials and Zoomers are going to be having the most kids at this point. And most millennials and Zoomers are not satisfied with the political landscape of the world in pretty much every country. So, of course, people are going to feel doom and gloom and not bring children into the world because of that. I do think that is a lot more correlative than any other thing that I have read from Lyman Stone here that we've talked about.
I mean, I have been seeing so many images of emaciated children coming in from Gaza over the past couple weeks.
Horrible.
Like, they are now in what is essentially the final phase of the genocide, right? Where they are just allowing these kids to fucking starve. And this rules-based international order that we inhabit, that supposedly wants to guarantee liberties and freedoms to everybody, is completely willing to allow children to be exterminated if it suits the needs of that rules-based international order. That's horrifying.
It is.
But because the powers that be have this insatiable need to continue to guarantee their own continuity of power, anything that could potentially challenge that very same continuity must be eliminated at any and all costs, even if that means killing tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of children. And so I think it's impossible in a way to look at all of that and come away from it thinking that, well, if I just have kids, they will bring joy into my life and my life will become more fulfilled. Because if the joy of children and the importance of children just as people is not something that the state is willing to guarantee for people that it is in opposition with, well, then what fucking reason should anybody have to believe that the state would be willing to protect its own? The only logic that allows for something like that is fascism.
And that, I think, is what a lot of people are feeling. I think a lot of people in our generation and even younger than us feel that exact same way. They look at the world, they look at our government, they look at the current order of the world, and they see these governments and our government so willing to kill children that are of the wrong type, of the wrong origin.
And I think that when it comes to this stuff, the natalism stuff, right, it's just the other side of that coin. It's about how do we create more people who are desirable, to counteract the undesirables. You know, the most extreme way, of course, is rather than simply creating more desirables, is to kill the undesirables. But, you know, either way, the balance of these things, what they see is the balance between Western civilization and, you know, the uncultured savage or whatever, that's at the core of all of this.
It is. And it's not even that subtle.
No.
To pin this back on Lyman Stone, one of his main arguments, and I think the reason why I found this so, I think, important to outline, especially after everything you just said here, is that this is the core, I think, of the belief as to why all of these natalists are the way they are, have the beliefs that they have, is because not because they necessarily want the birth rate to increase just like in a vacuum.
Per se, yeah.
They might try to make you think that's what they believe, but what they really mean is that they want the white population birth rate to increase.
Yes.
They do believe there are a set of undesirables. A lot of these are more brown countries.
Or even more accurately, to put an even finer point on it, they want the ratio of white people to non-white people to increase.
Yes.
So that doesn't necessarily mean more white births, but more white births is the easiest way to achieve that outcome.
Yeah, I guess it's not overt fascism. It's just like a soft fascism. And he has written in I think I have it linked again back in the show notes. He does have the similar belief that a lot of these white nationalists like Elon Musk have about migration, that he fears bringing in brown immigrants from different countries to, and I'm doing air quotes here, replace the population, replace the birth rate. Because the average white supremacist belief is that if you replace, air quote, a population in let's say a white country, it will change the layout, it will change the demographics of the country. And he kind of couches this in a way where he's like, I'm not saying we have to like kill brown people, but I just like to call this white supremacist centrism, because he's not just saying we have to deport all of these people, we have to do this, and that, but he doesn't want to, as he puts it, I'm quoting him, he doesn't want to try to just put a Band-Aid on the birth rate issue. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think I can speak for both of us in saying that is, I do think, the driving aspect of most of the conservative pro-natalists in America currently. Yeah,
it's the anxiety about being replaced. And it's so crazy to me now seeing this stuff really start to enter the general political lexicon.
Yeah.
Because fucking the Charlottesville Jews will not replace us, right?
Yeah.
How long was that? Wasn't that less than 10 years ago?
7? That was in 2017, if I remember correctly.
God.
Yeah, that was barely 8 years ago.
Things have just moved so very quickly. Yeah, it was August 2017, Unite the Right. And they're just gonna keep going.
Things have devolved in such a way so quickly that I think if you told us that people were on film openly admitting to and laughing about being a fascist in 2025, that would be unthinkable. I think there is the general concerns of the population decrease. There's the very racist, the very paranoid aspects of these. But I think just want to, of course, address that, if a population does decrease, there are actual real consequences for that. There's a reason why there are liberal thinkers that are trying to not be insane about this. Because if a population decreases, let's say, Detroit is a great example where the car industry sort of fell apart and people left that city and it was very destitute for a long time.
There's plenty of examples there. Like when your labor base is decimated, and in the case of something like Detroit, a lot of these were deliberate choices, deliberately racist choices. But if you don't have sufficient labor force to support a given industry or a given society, there end up being problems where you literally can't keep the lights on at some point.
And there's widespread suffering among the population in those regions that are still there. And that's why I do think some of this is still important to talk about. And I think why I have a fascination with this, because of course, a lot of fascists are the ones driving the conversation nationally about this, but there are reasons to care about this if you care about the collective good of all of us in society, and especially to take those narratives away from the white supremacists. I do think that is important to address. But I think as we're wrapping up, talking about labor here, one of the sillier aspects of specifically Lyman Stone in some of his writing, and of course there is some truth to this again, where he specifically stated that if we have a decrease in birth rate, we'll have less people, less labor pool, and less, as he put it, geniuses. So he's kind of saying, there will be less great inventors just by proxy of having less kids, which I guess is probably true. If you just have more people, you will have smarter people.
But that is just such a fucking dog brain thing to say. It's
exactly, yeah.
Without increased birth rates, we'll never find the next Steve Jobs. These people are like so obsessed with the myth of the great man, you know?
Yeah. And I think that's inherently intertwined with their belief of they always want lines to go up.
Mm-hmm.
They want the economy to keep increasing and getting stronger and bigger and more people. And I'll be real, I do think a population decline's maybe not the greatest necessarily. There will be challenges with that. But I don't think we need to continue to increase the amount of people alive in any given country. I think that's kind of a hubristic belief that we need to keep increasing population sizes. Later on in this show, I'm planning on doing an episode about Matt Iglesias and his book 1 Billion Americans, which I'm sadly again reading. I really am sad that I am reading this book for this show. But
that's all right. I'll read it too. We'll have a real corker of an episode about that.
I hope so. It's going to be a good one. But there is this, and this is cross liberal, cross conservative beliefs, where we just need to increase the population to keep up with the rest of the world and to keep the hegemonic power of the United States, which like I said before, I think is so hubristic.
Well, it's also this strange thing of, if you want to have more people than everybody, you should be encouraging immigration. Like just following this logic to its natural conclusion, right?
Yeah.
Because that means that not only are you getting bigger, the other countries are getting smaller. That's good, right?
I think so. I think you would think these people would like that, but of course that again goes to a lot of people are racist and scared when more immigrants are coming into the United States.
It's so inchoate, and I think that's the thing that drives me up a wall. Right? Is that having now kind of gone over what Lyman Stone's whole deal is, it sounds like a lot of his ideology, a lot of the things that he believes in, both from here are the problems and here are their solutions, like both sides of it, it doesn't really make sense when you put it all together.
No, and I think he correctly understands that natalism isn't the birth rate problem, the decrease in birth rate is there's no one solution to fix this.
Right.
It's a very complex problem that the world is facing. And I don't think at the end of we get to episode 100 of the show, I don't even think you and I will be able to properly diagnose what will fix this. It's just such a complex issue.
I think we're going to figure it out on like episode 27 personally. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, no, we're going to be the leaders of natalism thought and the correct answers.
That's right.
Reading a lot of Lyman Stone, of course, he's a lesser player in the natalism world and in politics. He's not the most well-known guy, but I do think a piece about him that I found really fascinating is I think he is a really good example of the intellectual class of writers and thinkers, especially conservatives. I think this is where a lot of these people are. I think a lot of conservative thinkers are exactly like Lyman Stone. I think he's a perfect peek into the current state of the pro-natalist right.
Yeah, for every Lyman Stone, you've got 100 other guys just like him working sort of like mid-tier positions at the Heritage Foundation, the American Enterprise Institute, the Family Research Council, and places like that.
Right, and a lot of these people want to impose. They're probably more socially conservative beliefs. Maybe they want to make the United States more like Hungary. And I don't think, let me be honest, I'm going to be bold. I don't think social conservatism is the way. I don't know what is the way, but I feel like being anti-gay marriage will not solve this issue that the world is facing right now. I'm just going to be so bold.
No, I know. It's almost like they're not actually interested in solving the ostensible problem at hand. Huh. Weird.
Weird, isn't it? Yeah. We didn't really get into this aspect of him, but if you want to have a fun time, maybe not a fun time, maybe a really bad time, however you look at it. But Lyman Stone has a very active Twitter account that he posts. I think you get a peek more into his psyche and how he is as a person on his Twitter than any of his other specific writing. And if you want to sort of just see who he is truly, I encourage you to go there, especially if you want to lose some brain cells and kind of get a little mad. So for this is homework for the listeners. If you want to lose some brain cells, go to his Twitter account.
All right, I'm there right now, and I think that this sums up my experience with this episode. This is his pinned tweet. It was made on August 3, 2022, and it says, and I quote, "It's all bad. All of it. Anyway,
Perfect.
I'm Josh.
I'm June.
We'll see you next week.
See ya.